And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. And of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. We ask everyone always, if you have a moment, like us, follow us. If you're a small indie media outlet, social media is your mother's milk. It's the saving grace. It's how you can attempt to spread the word, the message that you're focused on to a greater population that's sometimes overwhelmed by white noise and junk, and trying to swim your way through the currents of really, as Springsteen put it, how many stations and there's nothing on? Well, it's been quite a night. We've talked about, well, informed consent for parents and religious freedoms for medicine. We've spoken about crony corporatism that's happening around us at the highest levels. Tonight, however, in a very special segment, we're going to, in a sense, try to have a conversation about something that's beyond unquantifiable. I mentioned my run-up to this on social media. This situation, and I'll try to keep it polite, because it's frankly, I'm older than a lot of my libertarian brethren. It is simply the most outrageous thing I've seen in my life, and I've seen a lot of outrage. I've seen a lot of poor behavior. It's the reason why I'm a libertarian. This proves that on so many levels, from my personal perspective, the fundamental evils of collective government, particularly when it's hijacked from a variety of interests. But you know, you look at the intersection here. It's human rights. I spoke about civil rights, the justice system, the failed war on drugs, and the casualties from that, which outweigh exponentially the casualties from drug use in and of itself. The non-aggression principle, the underlying grace, if you will, of the libertarian movement, where we pledge not to use force or coercion to advance our own personal means. We talk about privacy. We talk about something as abstract and as technical now as currency markets, from which all of this originally spawned. The right to protection from illegal search and seizure. Literally, the morality of our justice system in and of itself. For those of you not familiar, Ross Ulbricht is a young man who's been sentenced to 2 consecutive life prison sentences for a nonviolent crime. And if you're a libertarian, you're still not sure where the crime was, because he hosted a site that did not advocate violence. It did not trade in violence. It simply, from my perspective, was a rather altruistic attempt to create a marketplace where folks could engage in commerce, free of coercion of government, free of taxation, well, free. And for that, as our guest points out, he has paid nearly the ultimate price. And for that, I believe the cardinal sin of giving proof of concept to cyber currencies, for pointing out the fallacies of evil that are often attributed to the free market, for that, an entire set of industries, justice systems, laid siege to a young man who, quite frankly, by all who've met him and all who are familiar with his case, point to a travesty of justice almost unparalleled. And so it is with great respect and great appreciation that I welcome to our show for the very first time someone that I hope to get to know better, as we try to provide our own little coalition flame to the fire. And there are many people working on behalf of Ross Ulbricht, but I'm very happy to introduce Lynn Ulbricht to the show. Listen, thank you on a Thanksgiving weekend. That's got to be a very conflicting time for you on so many different levels. Thank you for taking time to join us tonight.
Oh, I'm happy to. Thanks so much for having me.
Let's start sort of from the beginning, because there has been so much hype, so much flawed rhetoric, so many lies, so much misinformation applied to this entire I don't know if there's a word to really justify it. Case, situation, that all sounds so neutral. That sounds so neutered. This is not a case. This is not a situation. This is a young person's life that has been stolen from them. 7 years, I believe, almost to the day. Tell us about, give us a little personal perspective, if you don't mind. And by the way, if I go anywhere that you just simply are uncomfortable talking about, just let me know. This is
Okay.
challenging conversation. But tell us about Ross as a young man, as a young person. Your memories, of his time as a child, where he got that, sort of entrepreneurial fire from, the kind of innovation that he displayed at such a young age. Give us the backstory, if you will.
All right. Well, Ross was, I have a bit of an echo, by the way, but I'll do my best.
You sound great on our side.
Ross has, pardon me?
No, you sound great on our side. So.
Okay, good. He was a joy to raise. He was a very easygoing, laid-back kid, who was interested in a lot of things. He was always very creative. I didn't let him have video games, and he ended up doing a lot of art and painting because of that. I think partially, he played soccer. He was a Boy Scout. He was a normal kid, and but he always was very observant and very interested in science. He loved physics, and in fact went on to study physics in college. And so he's artistic on one hand and scientific on the other hand. As far as entrepreneurial, well, his father and I are both entrepreneurs, so he was raised in that milieu. I don't know, he's a smart kid, but I think what really happened was once he went to graduate school at Penn State, he started working for the Ron Paul campaign and got very enthusiastic, brought Ron Paul to Penn State, worked on his campaign, raised money, went door to door, and then he started reading Austrian economics and all of those people, and became passionate. And actually, he was on his way from getting his master's. He got his master's. He was on his way to Cornell, a scholarship to get his PhD, and he decided not to because it just wasn't his passion anymore. He was much more passionate about free markets and economics, which distraught me a bit. Since, like, what are you talking about? But he just became very passionate about all of that and felt like it was very important to bring those ideas to people. To that end, he created a video game so that people would actually have the experience as they played the game to understand free markets experientially. But that didn't work out, and so he turned to the internet and created Silk Road Marketplace, which you're absolutely right in your intro. It was not intended to be anything more than a free market. He definitely saw the potential for big monetary freedom with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin was the only exchange, means of exchange there, and it was really the first proof of use of Bitcoin. I just saw a Bitcoin ATM in my local Safeway today, a Bitcoin ATM, and I'm like, wow, this is unbelievable. I think a big part of why Ross is serving a double life sentence is because of Bitcoin, and here now it's in my local Safeway. That was a little bit disconcerting. But in any case, and it just shows how much everything's changed since those days. And you were right, the site was based on the non-aggression principle, which meant that everything was voluntary. So things that created a victim that hurt a third party in a transaction were not permitted. So there was no child pornography or anything related to pedophilia at all allowed. Right. There was no weapons, no stolen property, things of that sort. And this is the government's own evidence. This isn't an exhibit in the trial. This isn't me just saying this. And it adhered to it very strictly. So a top-level admin, Curtis Green, told me that they would spend a big part of the day scouring the site to make sure there was nothing on there that hurt a third party. But drugs were allowed. They were considered a choice. and it was most commonly exchanged were user amounts of cannabis, but there were people could decide what they wanted to do. Again, as long as it didn't hurt a third party. But there were many legal goods on there. It was like an eBay. There were many legal goods. There were, art and books and electronics and gardening tools. I mean, there's all kinds of things on there. Mm-hmm. And but it was private because it was, identities were hidden and Bitcoin was considered private, and so it was out of the mainstream.
Do you find irony in the fact that so many websites as they exist now, whether it be anything from the extreme like 4chan on up to, I don't know, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, they are essentially inoculated from any type of prosecution based on the content that other people provide to it. So people can say or plot the most horrendous things, and in the case of the plot realizes, let's just say abstractly, a certain level of reality, and it could be a plot that could invoke violence, the civil authorities are brought in to prosecute that person provoking the violence, but the host site, and this is a sacred concept right now in the American internet, and it's under challenge, but it's a sacred concept that everyone from AOL on up to 4chan and everyone in between, some of the most amazing and some of the most simultaneously despicable websites imaginable, have that freedom to be a publisher, not responsible for the content. How disturbing is it then that your son, because he hosted a site that engaged in commerce, but the commerce might have been construed as being alternative because it didn't adopt the currency system of the United States? Because as far as I can see, that's the litmus test he failed. He was promoting an alternative, a thoroughly moral, a thoroughly voluntary alternative to the, some would argue, the failed American currency system. Is that where the trouble began? When did you folks see or sense that, we've got a problem here?
Well, first of all, I had nothing to do with it, and I heard about it when he was arrested. But as regards what you're saying, I think you're exactly right, and that is my belief as well, that it was the Bitcoin that was such a threat, and I really became convinced of that when the other Silk Road defendants got their sentences. The biggest drug seller on Silk Road, Ross was never accused of selling drugs, by the way. The biggest drug seller on Silk Road got 10 years. He has the same offense level in the prison system and the BOP as Ross, and he got 10 years. But he didn't come up with a dangerous idea, and he didn't come up with an alternate currency system. And so he was not, I guess, considered dangerous. The judge herself said at sentencing, "We know you started the site for philosophical reasons, and we don't know that this is a philosophy you've left behind." And the philosophy we're talking about is libertarian, voluntary, free market. And by the way, this was not, his philosophy was not allowed to be known to the jury in trial. It was never allowed to be mentioned. It was forbidden to be mentioned. So he was painted instead, not as an idealist, which is what he is, and someone who wants to, make the world a better place. Look, he was 26 years old. I'm not saying what he did was right. I'm not saying what he did wasn't reckless, but he was 26 years old,
right,
and his intentions were good. And but they did not want the jury to know that, and they wanted them to think he was this kingpin. Now, I don't know too many kingpins who adhere to the non-aggression principle or engage in voluntary interaction. It's a joke, but that's what the prosecution painted him as, and they had a very carefully controlled narrative. And but I agree with you. And the other reason I'm sure that it was Bitcoin was that it came out a couple of years ago in The Intercept with Snowden revelations that the NSA was urgently tracking Bitcoin users a couple of months before Silk Road was taken down. They were using the full force of the federal government to go after this. They were very concerned about it. And I think they said they were going to make Ross an example. And, of course, it didn't work, but that's what they intended to do. And, you know, he was held responsible for everything.
You've got this disturbing pattern now, both locally and internationally, of folks who are involved in the freedom movement, from Snowden through your son, of the legal system literally inventing charges. It's
Oh, yeah.
it's a really bad take on a spy movie, except it's real.
Yes, absolutely.
When I posted this today, that you were going to be kind enough to join us, I had more than one person to react. And I'm not saying this to make you feel badly. I think it's just, again, we'll use the term proof of concept. Why are you treating, in the one words, were someone who's so violent as a martyr? And I said, wait a minute. How did the government concoct, again, try to keep it friendly here, keep it clean. How did the government concoct these charges of gangsterism, violence, hitmen, this crazy alternative reality? Where did that come from?
Anonymous chats that were never attributed to Ross or proven to be him. And, well, you know, there was so much of that. And they were never charged at trial. This allegations of planned violence against, you know, various people involved, never charged at trial, never ruled on by a jury, and yet the judge took it upon herself to use these allegations to enhance her sentence and justify it. This is a Sixth Amendment violation. The Sixth Amendment was written to protect the accused from a rogue judge or a rogue prosecutor saying, we don't care if a jury ruled on it or what they said, we think it's true and we're going ahead. We're supposed to be judged by a jury of 12 peers. And this particular argument went all the way to the Supreme Court, and then they didn't seem to care about it. And apparently this has been going on in our courts for a long time, that judges just take it upon themselves to decide, oh, this is true, whether a jury says so or not. There was another indictment based on the evidence given by corrupt agents, which, by the way, were not allowed to be known to the jury, but are now in prison. And those have been dismissed with prejudice. There is nothing in the legal system saying that Ross, or proving at all that Ross did this. But the media picked up on it from the prosecution before trial, and then they didn't indict him for it. But before they indicted him for it, they said it was, you know, this stuff, and it has been just kind of stuck, because the media loves that stuff. It's so much more exciting than saying there was raw milk on Silk Road.
Right.
And so, yeah, and this apparently is a very common tactic. I know other people who have told me that murder for hire was put on them. Alice Johnson, who President Trump commuted her sentence, she had it on her. I mean, they do this. Like you were saying, they make up stuff and they put it on you, and, you know, and pile on charges and all kinds of things to make you seem really bad. Ross has not one person who has come forward to say he's violent in any way. There's 100 letters on our website attesting to his really incredibly sterling character. And he, even the alleged victim of this murder plot, Curtis Green, has come out publicly supporting Ross, saying he doesn't think it was him and he can't wait for him to get out so they can hang out together. I mean, that is how often does that happen? And yet people, you know, who don't know say these things. Mm-hmm.
No, there's this disconnect here because I don't know if it would be possible to create an environment, even in fiction, where the charges being weighed against the individual are so divergent from the reality of the individual. It's beyond fiction.
And these aren't even charges. These aren't even charges, just to be clear.
Right.
They were never charged. Well, they were in Maryland. They never went to trial, I should say.
Right.
But they're dismissed. Anyway, sorry.
So what, talk about sentencing guidelines, because, smarter folks than I who have been on this longer than I have point out to the fact that you've got far too many people who are guilty of violent crimes who are on our streets, and yet here essentially you've got an administrative violation as far as I'm concerned. I still don't understand the prurient law that he broke. Again, FedEx routinely ships things, not knowingly. UPS, United States Postal Service, ships things to people that they probably shouldn't have shipped, and I don't see anybody going to jail.
Well, actually, the federal government indicted Federal Express under the same principle,
right,
and went after them for illegal pharmaceuticals that were being transported. But FedEx has pretty deep pockets, and that was dropped, but it took a while. It's vicarious liability. It's saying that the person, and that's the whole conspiracy laws are like that. It's like you're in the conspiracy if you're barely tangentially related to it. But saying you're responsible, FedEx is responsible.
Oh, you there?
Who's actually doing it?
Yep.
They have never indicted the post office, by the way.
Right.
They've haven't done that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's been lots and lots of drugs sent through the mail. But
Right.
anyway.
Right. So what? But sentencing guidelines. What? You're in a position. He's been found guilty of this air quote charge. What was anticipated to be the sentence before it came down? What had you been led to believe?
Well, I certainly didn't believe he would get a life sentence for something he did on a computer.
Double life
when
without parole.
He was 26 years old.
Right.
I mean, I was devastated. Our whole family, we just couldn't believe it. But apparently, this is within her discretion. Even the appellate court, because it went up to the appellate court and the Supreme Court. The sentence didn't actually go to the Supreme Court, but to the appellate court. Those judges even said, well, we might not have given that sentence. We don't like, they obviously thought it was way over the top, but it was within her discretion to do it. It's within the law. And she actually was shot down by the Second Circuit, right? She's retired. She's young, but she quit for excessive sentence towards the end of her term. And they took it away from her and had her resentencing with another judge. She's known for harsh sentencing. He was her 5th life sentence that year, and it was only May. She's she's a hanging judge. She was a hanging judge. And, yeah.
She
just said, I'm going to give you the worst possible sentence I possibly can. I mean, if she could have, she would have given him the death sentence. She made that very clear. She gave him a walking death sentence, essentially, anyway.
Right. Because ultimately, at this point, since the Supreme Court, I believe the technical term is rejected certiorari, that your only appeal is clemency from the presidency of the United States. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yep. We're working hard on that. That's why we have a petition that's approaching 250,000 signatures.
Right, and for folks who hear this or see our social media on this, there isn't a libertarian alive who shouldn't sign this petition. How many millions of people?
Thank you. The Libertarian Party officially and unanimously called on the president to issue clemency to Ross.
Yeah, I was there. I was a delegate at that convention.
You were there.
I was delegate at that convention.
Fantastic.
And his case was brought up again this weekend in an informal conference 2 weeks ago. I'm a member of something called the Libertarian National Committee, and we talked about it and the situation then. And there's I'm a parent. I'm not going to toss you any cliches. I can only speak from my own experience. I can't even begin to imagine what this journey has been like for you, because you've got life, the challenges of life in and of itself, and now you are fighting the ultimate earth behemoth, and that's the federal government. And which is
Yep.
no rush to do anything. You know, let's circle back a little bit because, by the way, the website is freeross.org, and there's an amazing depth of material here in the website. It's easily accessible. They've taken the Silk Road case and broken it down into about 8 or 9 quadrants, if you will, to really address each of the areas of salient issues, because it's the level of intellectual corruption, I'll say, on this is so comprehensive that it's if it wasn't someone's life, the sheer banality of the evil of law as it's been applied in this case is astonishing unto itself. Except there's someone's life at stake. So you talk about the Fourth Amendment, digital privacy. Give us a little snapshot on that if you can.
Sure. Well, yeah, that was one of the other. That was the other issue. The Fourth Amendment went to the Supreme Court, and the argument was basically, as it stands now, because they rejected the petition, the federal government can continue to go through all of our internet activity without a warrant, without probable cause, with no oversight, in secret, if they want to. They can use anything they find against you. They can blackmail officials. They can persecute enemies. They can, it has our medical information now, our sexual orientation, our religious beliefs. And it all stems from a very antiquated third-party doctrine, which was ruled on 4 decades ago by the Supreme Court then, based on the dial alpha. And they ruled that the federal government, without a warrant, could find out what number you dialed. That was the only thing they knew, the number you dialed. Of course, now technology has changed so much, it's a little computer that you're walking around with and has all of this relevant information that they can scarf up at their whim without any oversight or any explanation. And that's what they did in Ross's case with no warrant. They also went into his router, which isn't even the internet, that's in his home. And they also aimed a directional antenna at his house and tracked him in his house with no warrant. They can do that to any of us at any time, and they could be doing it to you right now. This is outrageous, except that what's happened is that the courts and the law have not kept up with technology. And so our Fourth Amendment protections are being shredded rapidly. And the surveillance state, of course, is growing, metastasizing as far as I can tell. And so that was the other issue. And we're really hopeful for this one. And because he kind of being rejected, and then they dropped it, they didn't take it. That was another devastating moment. It was really, I couldn't believe it. I really thought they were going to take that one up.
Because as you step your way through each process, you realize that the government is doing everything they can to ignore even fundamental common sense. The facts simply do not support at any level this type of sentencing. It's just, you've got collusion between the DEA and the NSA, unbeknownst to people on trial. You've got fictionalized evidence. You've got complete. And by the way, if I could just point out editorially, for those of you in the cheap seats, your federal government and probably your congressman, such paragons of courage, this past week re-invoked or renewed the Patriot Act, and by the way, did so by burying it in a budget bill, because they simply don't have the stones, if you will, all right, to admit that they're doing it publicly. And it was truly a bipartisan act of courage that Republicans and Democrats continued in force, despite public protestations to the contrary, decided to continue this same pattern of behavior. It's because and that's not only is Ross's situation tragic, but the other tragedy is that we haven't learned from this yet. this is still considered acceptable behavior by a federal government that, well, you, all of us, maybe not me, not Lynn certainly, help elect. And so that next time that great, you may like term limits, but not for your guy, because hell, we just got us a new highway and we got us a new grant for a football stadium. Yeah, these very same people are literally using your tax dollars to fund traps, just like that ensnared Ross Ulbricht. I mean, it's going on as we speak. And again, for everyone who thinks this is a bad spy movie, look at Snowden, look at Ross. It's happening. It's real. This isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I went into this, pretty conservative, lean libertarian, but I had faith that we would have a fair trial. I had faith in, the system to an extent. I thought, okay, we're going to get our day in court, right? Mm-hmm. And what I have learned is that our freedoms in this country are being hijacked, if they haven't been totally hijacked already, and that it's totally, as far as trials, we do not have fair trials at all. And, that's why 98% of people, whether they're innocent or guilty, plea, because they won't get a fair trial, and they're told that, basically, by bullied and threatened by prosecutors. And, we're losing our country, mm-hmm. The principles of our country. And, it's been a really, it's been very eye-opening, and very much turned me into an activist, because not just for Ross, but just this whole situation, because I really think we're at a crossroads in history right now. Yep. And if we don't wake up, we're gonna lose the freedoms that we have.
They went so far to vilify Ross that they ignored the fundamental reality of how Bitcoin works in assigning almost complete responsibility to how the system was operational, and assigned 100% of the blame to, quote unquote, and I use the term blame very loosely, mm-hmm. To Ross, when in fact, and worked extensively to obscure from the jury any information to the contrary.
Right. They didn't even let the jury know about the corrupt agents that were all over the site. Mm-hmm. And the jury didn't even know there were corrupt agents that had the ability to pretty much do anything they wanted on the site. And that was stopped from the jury knowing. And it's outrageous. And it was totally stacked against Ross. And they wanted their trophy. Mm-hmm. It's like putting someone's head on the spike of the medieval castle. It's like, this is going to happen to you if you do this. This is our example. And, he's going to die in a cage because of his philosophy, because he did this. And,
And so...
what happened?
You talk about cross-examination. Again, all of this is on the website. You can lead through it step by step. And I'm grateful for this has got to be this continuing nightmare. You're forced to rehash the same travesties, and I'm grateful for your willingness to do it, because it's so difficult for most, I'll call them normies, as we say in the libertarian movement, most regular folks, to absorb that government could be this on a collective level, so evil and so hell-bent to create a desired outcome. You talk about the blocked cross-examination. How many witnesses were you and the defense able to bring to bear against his case?
The defense or the prosecution? There were no witnesses that saw Ross do anything.
Right.
It was all based on anonymous chats.
Right.
It was all digital evidence, pretty much. And there was one witness that actually testified that Ross told him he had gotten rid of the site and passed it on to someone else. But that was the only live witness. It was digital, which in other courtrooms has been thrown out because it's so easily tampered with. Mm-hmm. There's a huge amount of question about how the laptop was handled, how things were, digital evidence had been tampered with, manipulated. It's very easy to have it do that and show no trace. And I mean, this is very complicated because it gets into all of that, and I don't think the jury or the generally judges understand digital information. They don't understand the digital age,
Right.
you know. And I don't blame them, but yeah. So there were no witnesses. It wasn't like a regular, oh, I saw Ross do this at all. Nothing.
Yeah, and in fact, the notion of the protecting the chain of evidence is so critical in trials where the penalty, the outcome could be this substantial that you've seen entire court cases dismissed because there was one step in that chain that was broken, whether it be a knife, a weapon, anything. If in fact the chain of evidence is not complete, then simply that evidence is not allowed in court. I'm no attorney.
There's a lot of that in this case, a lot.
Right.
And we weren't, the defense wasn't allowed to explore it. The judge shot our lawyer down, and yeah, it was, God, it was quite the travesty.
Now
she coached the prosecution. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, you've even got the specter of a government special agent who was actively ingratiated themselves into the operation of the site. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, they had the ability to act as Dread Pirate Roberts, who Ross supposedly was that guy. It was the handle for the lead administrator. They could act as him. They could act as many other aliases. They had passwords, keys. They stole money. That's what they used their access to do. Stole a lot of Bitcoin, 20,000 Bitcoin, I think, or something like that. But they also could change chats and things, anything in the marketplace, anything in the forum, and then that was used as evidence. And so, this is completely tainted, and this was not allowed to be known to the jury.
Right.
It all came out 2 months later that these guys existed. And suddenly, there were these corrupt agents, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, hello?
Yeah. Yeah, and the notion that these people were rogues, I just, for a highly controlled environment like that where everything is documented internally, like a lot of governments in the past have done, the notion that this has all happened and happenstance is just absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Even to the point when critical information like the laptop was found to have broken the chain of evidence, you folks weren't even allowed an expert witness to testify to the effects of what could happen digitally to that evidence.
Correct.
When it wasn't in a controlled environment.
They even crashed the computer in the middle of the whole thing. At one point, one of the agents had the computer without anyone else around for a couple hours, maybe longer. That's not supposed to happen. There's supposed to be at least two of them, because you can imagine, they could be tampering with all kinds of things. I'm not saying he did. I'm not accusing him of anything, but I'm not saying he didn't either. And I don't know.
Right.
It definitely broke the chain of evidence, and then, and they totally crashed it. So by the time the evidence got to court, it was a copy of a copy of a copy. Except, who knows what happened in the middle of all that. And then they took evidence from the laptop, and it's like, well, who knows where that came from, Curtis Green, who, again, was a top-level admin, he said publicly on a podcast with me, he goes, there was stuff in there I know I didn't write that's in those chats. I know they put that in there because I didn't recognize it. This is if they did that to him, they did it to Ross or whoever else was DPR,
Right. This is essentially a 21st century equivalent of an officer pulling you over and dropping a nickel bag back in the 60s in your glove compartment. Except that in the 60s, if you got caught with a nickel bag, you didn't get sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. That's the difference here.
Right. And when you think, I just would like your listeners to understand, because they may go, well, this and that about the site, and I we can discuss that. But the point is, how can you justify a double life plus 40-year sentence without parole for a first-time nonviolent offender? No violence, first-time offender. He was 26. He's young. He's 35 now. He's a different person now. He's mature. He's definitely remorseful. He's like, God, I wish, of course I regret it. I mean, it's not like he's going to get out and do it again.
Well, and
he's very smart. He's got a lot to give. He's got a lot to contribute. And he's very humanitarian, really. And he's got all these ideas. He'd be a good asset to our society.
No, and add to the fact that some of the things that he's accused of illegally distributing are now legal.
Legal. That's right. I was just in the Bay Area, and there are these big billboards going, cannabis delivered to your door. And I'm like, wait a second, isn't my son serving double life for that?
Right.
These are billboards. I have a picture of one. I couldn't believe it. And I'm like, wow, things, and the whole Bitcoin thing, that was so, nefarious. Well, now, of course, Bitcoin, like I say, it's in my safe way, but it's also, big companies like JP Morgan are dealing in Bitcoin. It's like, it's a different time now.
Well, but you see, that's the ultimate proof. And again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm really not. If you knew me in real life, I sell trucks during the day. Okay, but the overriding quilt, patchwork that's been painted here, is that once government has been able to successfully monetize behavior that was once considered immoral and then / as a result illegal, all of a sudden the blinders are off and it is now an acceptable product to be promoted by the government. Those that sought to
they make a lot of money.
Right. Those that sought to interfere with that, all right, or those who sought to bypass that, however peaceful or however altruistic their motivation may have been, need to be slapped down brutally. On a much lower level, we had a situation here years ago in Rhode Island, and this doesn't even compare, but just as an analogy, we've got the Narragansett Sovereign Nation here. They decided on their own tribal lands to sell cigarettes that were tax-free. You should have seen, it's on video, the Stadies, flying down 95 one day, literally ended up in a fist fight with and arresting most of the tribe at one point or some level, just because, again, on a much simpler level, you screw with government's money, you screw with the process,
Exactly.
and you've got a target. And I can.
No, they want their money. We know that, don't we?
Right.
They want their money.
And I think back to the origins of Bitcoin, and I certainly was no pioneer in blockchain, and I can see how people who have such exhaustive control over so many aspects of our lives all of a sudden look at an alternative currency and say, oh my God, the entire premise, the entire concrete fabric, if you will, for lack of a better term, upon which our enterprises are built are being challenged like this. We must stop it, and we must stop it now. You seem to have moved beyond that, and you simply, at this point, while I'm sure deep in your heart to hearts as a mother, want all sorts of unspeakable things, and no one will blame you. But at this point, you just simply want your son back, don't you?
Yeah, and actually it's interesting you say that, because sometimes I have said, certain expletives about various people that have been involved in this, and Ross goes, no, Mom, can't go there. He will not be bitter. He said, I've forgiven all those people. I have to, and I'm just, all I want to, they don't matter. They're just part of the machine, and I just want to, get out. But it's like I'm very proud of him for that. I think it'd be very easy to be consumed with hatred, and he's not. And he inspires me not to be too. But yeah, I just want my son, and I would bet my life, and I mean that literally, that he would never hurt anyone. Mm-hmm. He would never cause any problems. That he just wants to come out and live his life and, do good. within the law, I might add.
Yep.
And yeah, that's what I want. And you know, and I think it's the right thing. It's not just because I'm his mother, and yes, of course, I love him dearly, but I really do think it's the right thing. Ross does not belong in that place, and many people don't. I mean, to be fair,
Right.
and to be clear, I've gotten to learn a lot about the criminal justice system and the prisons, and it is a travesty. It is a human rights crisis, is what it is.
Right.
The length of sentences that people are serving, and it's very un-American. This is a new trend since the 80s. The prison population has metastasized 800%. They're putting people in cages at an unprecedented rate, and a lot of it's the drug war. And you know, this isn't what we're supposed to be doing in the United States, and it makes us the biggest incarcerator in the world.
Oh, absolutely.
Terrible.
You know, in many circles, it's called the pipeline to prison. You know, you've got to literally, if you're caught up at any level in the system, and you end up there, your life is effectively ended in so many ways in terms of prospects.
Right.
You know,
Right.
your inability. You know, there's an old saying in Boston: "In the halls of justice, justice is in the halls," and the ability of someone to compete financially with the American jurisprudence system is ultimately what dictates your chance of surviving it. And that's
Right, and that's why I'm constantly trying to raise money.
Well,
because that is one way they crush you, you know.
let's talk about that because you know I know, for example, that you live in Texas and you're going to be. You know,
Well, I've actually moved to Tucson.
Oh, okay.
Because Ross was, I've been basically following him around so that he'll be sure and have visits and a lifeline
Wow.
to the outside world, because I don't want him getting swallowed up in that world of prison with nothing, you know, nothing else to hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
I want him to stay healthy mentally and emotionally. So anyway, I've moved to Tucson, and luckily it's a nice place, and he's here in Tucson. So, yeah.
Well, I hope, and I know that you know you're under a lot of stress because of legal costs and everything else like that. I would hope that the libertarian community would find a way for you to join us in Austin this summer.
Well, I'm trying. Maybe you can put in a good word with
Oh,
me.
we
Dan Fishman recommended me. You know, he's the executive director.
Yeah,
I have not heard back from the person organizing the convention. I spoke at the Libertarian Convention. It was well received in Orlando, you know, a few years, I guess, ago. But yeah, no, I would like to do that. I'm trying to. So yeah, if you can help me
I know Dan.
get on the roster.
I know Dan. We'll he's probably listening now.
Okay, well, I hope so, because he's a great guy. And he and Nick Sarwark wrote a letter on Ross's behalf to the president. And then, of course, the Libertarian Party officially. Both Nick and Dan are great, and so many other libertarians that I, you know. And, yeah, so he actually recommended me, but I haven't heard back. So I don't know if I'm going to be invited, but I hope so.
Well, let's talk about. We got a couple minutes left. Let's talk about freeross.org and all the things that you can do on this to facilitate ending this. And again, trying to keep it a little low key, the rhetoric low key. I'll call it a travesty of justice, although it's that exponentially. So there are places. First of all, you can contribute to the Legal Defense Fund, and if every libertarian just kicked in, gave up a coffee this week, as we say in Rhode Island, where I live,
that's true.
That would go a long way. The petition is a slam dunk. You know, have you had any success with the Trump administration in getting any sort of hearing?
Well, we're working on it, you know, and that's one of the things I was going to say. If anyone has any political connections at all, please get in touch with me. You know, I want to plead my case to the president or people near the president with influence, or can, you know, have him hear that this is a worthy thing for him to consider. So if anybody has any, connections, please get a hold of me. At every footer of freeross.org has a way to get my email.
Right. No, and again, you're remarkably responsive. You know, what you've been able to do here is astonishing. I know you're not quite there yet, but it's just you are truly a force of nature in this. So free Ross, well,
That's that mother love.
yeah, no, you really can't. So freeross.org is where to find literally everything. Everything that we discussed
Pretty much, yeah.
is laid out step by step. You know, you've got a conversation about each and every aspect of the case in depth. There is an impressive list of national leaders who have signed on.
Gary Johnson is supporting us.
Yeah.
That's another, of course, big libertarian.
Yeah, Tom Woods.
And I want to say one other thing before I forget. One of the other things I really need help, and if people are interested, we're having Free Ross supporters show up at Trump's rallies with signs and things to be noticed. They've been at 3 so far on New Hampshire, Texas, and just Florida, and one's coming up in Pennsylvania. And I'm trying to get groups organized in advance because Trump doesn't announce very far in advance.
Right.
And the man does a lot of rallies. I'm like, please take a break. I'm exhausted. But anyway, if anybody wants to help with that effort, it'd be great. Because I think it would matter if he could see. I want him to see that there's a movement, and every rally he goes to, it's like, who are these people again? What are they doing again? So.
Yeah. No. And that's what has to happen. It's ultimately it's going to be political pressure. I don't think either you or I live under the illusion that somehow. Well, I don't know. I don't want to say that someone is going to come along and not going to come along and do the right thing simply because it's the right thing. I'm older now, maybe a little too cynical, but political pressure will certainly accelerate that. And I think that should be on every libertarian. That should be a question to the duopolies candidates in the coming congressional and federal elections. Simply, make that a question. What are you doing? Are you aware of, and why are you not actively working to? We as a nation look to countries around the world for injustice, and we as a nation have come together to fight injustice on some notable occasions. And we as a nation have worked to secure the freedom of people who are not Americans. It is time that perhaps we look with perhaps a cynical eye to our own jurisprudence and our own judicial system here and say, okay, there are people here who are incarcerated for acts that weren't criminal and certainly are no longer criminal. So we need to free Ross Ulbricht. It's that simple.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, again, thank you. Grace us by your presence.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime, really. Just let me know. I'll come back on. Maybe I'll do video. I can do video next time.
Okay. No, fair enough. Because again, because here's the challenge for every American mother, any mother anywhere. Life continues. Life's challenges, the normal quote unquote challenges of life, continue.
Yeah.
And yet you've got this screaming headache, if you will, every morning you wake up and have to confront another day. And how do you continue to overcome and do battle with life's normal challenges when, as I've said about a few situations that have come to the coalition, what happens when you wake up, and everyone needs to think about this. If you woke up one morning and you were the center of literally an international incident, what would you do? What would you do to protect your family? What would you do to protect your own philosophy and your morality? I don't know. I don't know that I could be as brave as you are. So again, congratulations for all the wrong reasons.
Well, thank you. I mean, look, it's one day at a time, and it just sort of, you keep going, and it just happens. As long, and then now it's become bigger for me because I've seen the injustice not only to Ross but to so many people in prisons, and then you realize how our freedoms are being eroded, and it's kind of like, well, what else are you going to do with your life but fight that? Are you just going to roll over and let it happen, or I just don't see doing that. And like I said before, I think we're at a tipping point. I think it's actually a very crucial, pivotal time of history, and it's important for people to wake up and step up. Because I really do fear that for going into the future that we are going to not be living as free people.
Right. And when you see it firsthand, when it happens to your family,
Yeah, exactly. When you see it firsthand, you
how
really get it. Yeah.
how do you take the blinders off of other people? I wish I had an answer for that. I wish everyone should be as passionate about these fundamental issues as folks like you have had to become for all the wrong reasons. And so as a result, you know, maybe they can't manage or develop or bring to life the consistent bravery you've shown. But at the same time, it should not be on any of us the ability to summon outrage. And this is a time when we need to summon outrage.
Yeah, and it's not like again, it's not just for Ross; it's for yourself. I mean, this kind of government overreach in a trial and sentencing puts us all in peril. That they can do this puts us all in peril.
Right.
It's not just Ross's rights; it's all of our rights.
It becomes
And it sets a horrible precedent besides, but
it becomes easy for them.
Mm-hmm.
It really does become easy for them after a while. You are no longer an individual; you're a number, and that's what's happened in this nation with our judicial system. You know, again, we throw people in jail because they were born on the wrong side of a fence. We throw people in jail because they have a plant. We throw people in jail because of economic circumstances. Beyond, I mean, are we becoming a prison colony? We were once the freest nation on the planet.
Well, if they keep this up, they are, because over 60% of the prison population is nonviolent, mainly drug offenders. So they're not going to stop drug use. It hasn't worked. Mm-hmm. They can't even keep drugs out of the prisons, but they just keep putting more and more people in cages for it. So we're going to be like, the state, the nation of incarceration here, where we're just going to have prisons everywhere. Because that's the alternative.
Yeah.
The drug war is a total failure as far as stopping people using drugs, but it works quite well for making tons of money and expanding government power. So, yeah.
Well, that's why it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yep.
Again, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
You've been having
I hope to meet you, and yeah. Hopefully, I'll meet you at the Libertarian Convention in Austin.
I'll get to work on that. When I get out the show, I'll torture Dan. But anyway, listen, God bless you. Lynn Oberg, of course,
Thank you.
mother
You
of
too.
Ross Oberg. FreeRoss.org is the website. There's a couple of very simple things that you can do. You can sign the petition. You can forward the petition to your friends. You can take a moment and maybe ease up on what's happening, the latest moment in the presidential campaign, and instead direct that energy towards what's happening to our freedoms and how Ross Ulbricht personifies that. Those are the type of things that everybody can do. In fact,
Right.
a pox on you if you don't spend time this weekend doing it. And we'll leave it at that. All right. Well, we'll talk.
Okay.
We'll talk soon. We're going to end this
Sounds
evening
good.
then with just a request that on this Thanksgiving weekend, you take a moment for all three subjects that we discussed tonight, but again, primarily the last guest, that you take a moment to contemplate, to reflect on what we have as far as blessings, but at the same time, never forget the challenges that a few people of ill will can perpetrate on a society. It's not too late. We can free Ross, and we can also improve the quality of all our lives simultaneously. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of, well, thousands and thousands of stories. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Of course, the mothership at coalitionradio.us, where you can find links to our YouTube pages, our Spreaker podcast page, and everything you need to know to advance the cause of liberty here in these United States. God bless all. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend, and we'll see you next Friday night.